You're listening to Gary Edshead on 6PR, the voice of Perth.
Yeah, welcome back. We're talking about synthetic drugs and the websites that peddle the stuff and the merchants that are behind it. Well, Curtin University's Stephen Bright has penned a particularly good research paper. It's all about prevention research in relation to this area, new and emerging drugs. He's an expert in this field. Stephen Bright joins me on the line. Thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Okay, now, look, there's no doubt that it's pretty easy to go to the computer and find a website where I can buy research chemicals or synthetic cannabis. Should that still be the case, given the fact that, laws have changed now?
Well, in fact, there has been 40 legislative changes in Australia since the first change in Western Australia in 2011. And has it made a difference? Not really. There has been a decrease in the availability in people being able to access some of these products from brick and mortar stores, but it hasn't had much impact on sites such as you refer to.
What do you can I get your impression of the people who are behind these sites, like this wicked high.com that we're talking about? What do you think of those people that are actively making money out of products that they don't really know what's in them and don't really care too much about the health of people?
Well, they're clearly entrepreneurial individuals with a lack of any ethics, because the chemicals contained in these products, we have very little idea of what the acute toxicity might be, whether they are neurotoxic, carcinogenic, and we're not going to find out this information for another 20 years or so, really. What's happened with the emergence of these new drugs, and they have emerged as a consequence of people getting around the law or people wanting to avoid drug tests, with the rapid emergence of these new drugs, the way we run medical research is that we first give the new drug that's developed to animals to determine how toxic they are. Then we run phase 1 clinical trials where we get a small number of humans who are paid a lot of money to test the drug on humans to make sure that they're safe. Then we do phase 2 trials to start looking at whether they're actually effective in what they're doing. And then phase 3 multi-site studies. With these rapidly emerging new drugs, what we've seen is the whole thing's been flipped around. The cart's been put before the horse. And so now the people are becoming the lab rats taking these drugs. We then identify that these drugs are on the market, and then we give them to the rats. So, in terms of people who are taking these drugs, they're really lab rats.
But you have a sense that, the prohibition that is increasing, if you like, because of the changes in laws and the onus of proof laws that we have in Western Australia, for example, you're saying it ain't working, prohibition's not working.
Look, it's not working. A colleague of mine, Dr. David Caldecott, is calling what we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years the vortex of doom regarding prohibition. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different effect. What we need to do is have a rethink about drug policy. We really need to start thinking outside the box, and we can do that by looking at what other countries have put into place, and we can also do that by, hypothesising about what other strategies might be effective.
You obviously have a view. Rod Bridge, he's a father who is trying to do something to stop other people going the way of his son who died because they tried synthetic drugs and it went horribly wrong.
Yep.
What would you say to him?
I would say that if we looked at alternative models, such as the regulation of psychoactive substances that have a lower potential for harm, such as LSD or MDMA, then people like his son may be still alive because they would have been able to access a pure quality controlled version of LSD. Look, they probably would have got their hands on it because it wouldn't be available to people under the age of 21 or under the age of 18 or something like that, just like, the 16-year-olds and the 15-year-olds get their hands on the booze.
Yeah.
But But I would say his son would still be alive. But that's one end of the spectrum. In New Zealand, they've had a very interesting experiment where what they did was they regulated the legal high products. And it was a tremendous success. What they saw was no more new drugs emerging. And what they also were able to do was have quality control. People had to have licenses people had to have licenses to sell illegal highs. They had to have there were specifications over the packaging of them, like they had to have information about how to correctly dose, information about who to contact if something goes wrong. They weren't allowed to have, be pretty looking. They were plain packaged, like plain packaged cigarettes. And during that...
Yeah, I was going to say, doesn't that mean, though, that the government and society, therefore, just goes into the drug game, the synthetic drug game, the standard drug game? Is that the way we want to go? Where we throw our hands up and say, we can't stop anything, so let's get into the business.
Well, let's look at the facts when it comes to the war on drugs and prohibition. Since being implemented in the late 1960s, drugs have only become cheaper and more available. And do you know who's making all the money out of it? The cartels.
Yeah.
If the government were to take the approach like New Zealand did, and I don't necessarily recommend that as approach, because what they did was actually just regulate the new alternative drugs rather than the traditional illegal drugs, and they only licensed a few drugs that were able to be sold. But that was a fantastic way of stopping all of these new drugs emerging. An alternative model is the Portugal model. What Portugal did in 2001 is that they decriminalised the personal possession of illegal drugs. And what that did is freed up a whole lot of money that's being spent on prosecuting the low-hanging fruit, and they put that money into treatment and into social integration. So in Portugal, if you get caught with some heroin, you go before a tribunal where they determine whether or not you have a drug problem. If they determine you have a drug problem, then you are compelled to enter treatment, where they have amazing treatment services, that so far better than what Australia has. But the key is they then give incentives to employers to provide employment to people coming out of the treatment centres after 12 months, and it helps these people reintegrate in society. So Portugal's been a tremendous success. They've got one of the lowest drug use rates in the European Union, and most importantly, because of the decriminalisation of the drugs there, they're able to spend a lot more money on prevention, and their prevention is world class. It's far better than what we're doing in Australia. In Australia, 66% of our money goes towards law enforcement, 21% goes towards treatment, 9% goes towards prevention, and 2 or 3% goes towards harm reduction. What Portugal have done is flip that around. So 66% of the money goes into treatment and rehabilitation and prevention, and the rest of the money goes into law enforcement, focusing on prosecuting the big drug cartels.
All right, Stephen, well, like you said, it's an emerging drug, still an emerging problem. Maybe we need to rethink it. I do appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. We need to start thinking outside of the box. We need to look at what other countries are doing, and maybe even Australia could come up with an innovative solution and be a world leader in addressing this issue.
Thanks for your time.
So, he's saying, and he's done a lot of research in this area, we aren't winning this war. We aren't stopping these websites. We're not preventing the merchants from being able to sell this to our kids or to anyone for that matter, because enough of it will get in through the post. He's saying the prohibition scenario has not worked and we need to change tack. In other words, the government essentially needs to get into the synthetic drug game as well as the more traditional drugs, because that way you at least save lives. People don't go down paths into the black market in order to get something that they want. What do you think about that? This is something that's very difficult for us in Western Australia to comprehend, that essentially we throw up our hands and say we ain't winning, so let's regulate, not make illegal these type of synthetic drugs. I'd love to get your view on that. It's a very controversial thing. It is happening in other parts of the world, but I don't think here in Australia we've got to that point yet.